So what we're going to do now is add some seed data for our new activities table. And as I mentioned, we're going to do it a slightly different way to how we did it last time. And inside the persistence project, what I'm going to do is create a new class. And I'm just going to call this one seed. Now we're doing this a slightly different way this time. Previously, inside our data context, we used the Entity Framework configuration so that we could add data into a migrations class, and then when we updated our database with the new migration, then this would populate the data into the database. Now the downside to doing it this way is that we have to manually create the IDs each time for each entity. And it would be fine to do so on this occasion as well, but when it comes to related data, then it becomes much more tricky to manage this method of seeding data into our database, and it's much better to use an alternative method to do so. So what I'm going to do is in my seed class, I'm just going to create a static method inside here, and I'm going to say public static void and just call it seed data. And in this particular method, we're going to pass as a parameter our data context so that we can make use of this. And what we want to do first is we just want to do a simple check to see if we have any activities already inside this database. So I'm going to say add the not operator and say if context.activities.any in this case, and we'll need to bring in system.link to make use of the any command. So we're only going to execute what's inside this if statement if we don't already have any activities in our database. And if we don't have any activities, then what we're going to do is say var activities equals a new list of activity. And we'll need to bring in system collections generic to make use of list, and also the domain to make use of our activity entity. And inside here, what we're going to do is basically create several new activities. Now, what we're going to do here doesn't require any brain power at all. It's just really creating a bunch of different activities, and we need several of them so that we've got some data to work with. Now, when it comes to things that don't require much brain power, but it does require quite a significant amount of typing, then I do have some snippets available that we can use to save ourselves a bit of time here. So if you open up the course assets folder, you'll see inside here I've got some reactivities.code-snippets, and these will work with VS Code. Now if you're not using VS Code, I've also got the same thing just as a text file, and if you open this, then this is effectively the same thing, but it's just in a text file, and you'll be able to find the snippet we're using based on the code that I'm using to access the particular snippet. Now, if you are using VS Code, all we want to do here is just drop the reactivities code snippets inside our .vs code folder, and then we'll have access to these whenever we need them. Now, like I say, if you are not using VS Code, I do have these snippets available as a text file as well. So whatever prefix I'm using, you'll be able to see the same prefix, and then it's just a case of copying the code into your clipboard and then pasting it in manually. But if you're using VS Code, then you'll just be able to use the prefix to drop in the code that I'm demonstrating as I'm doing now. So now that we have the snippets available, what I'm going to do is just type in s_3.3, and this is going to bring in a bunch of different activities, and 10 of them in total, that we can make use of in our application. And we'll just need to bring in date time, so I'm going to bring in using system. And each activity is going to be given a different date, as a couple in the past, and the rest are all in the future. And none of these have an ID, so I'm going to let SQLite or Entity Framework generate this particular ID for each of these activities, and it will be created as a GUID, and we'll see this very shortly. So below our new list of activities, and I'll just close this one off with a semicolon, and we still want to be inside the if statement here. And if I look at this particular bracket and scroll on up, then we can see that I'm still inside this particular if statement. And what we want to do from here is we want to say context activities dot add range and then activities. And then we can say context dot save changes. Now you might be wondering why I've not used an async method to do this for this particular circumstance. First of all, we're only going to be executing this method once when the application starts up. And there's going to be no user requests that come in to execute this particular method. So there's actually no real need for this to be an async method at all. And what I'm going to do now is we want this to run this particular seed data command when our application starts up. So I'm going to go into the program.cs class, and just underneath our context.database_migrate, I'm just going to run the seed and then the seed data method and pass in the context. And now when our application restarts, it's going to hit this seed data method. And then if we don't have any activities in our database, and we don't at this moment, then it's going to add all of these activities in there. And if I take a look at my terminal window, what I'll find is that because .NET Watch Run was running, my application has automatically restarted and each of my activities has been inserted here. And if we go and take a look at Solution Explorer and we take a look at SQLite Explorer and I just show the table for activities, then we should see that we now have our 10 activities added to our database. Now, please don't worry about what we see in this ID column. This is a blob, and a blob cannot be displayed as a piece of text inside this SQLite view of our table we're looking at. And when it comes to retrieving the activities from the database, they will not be passed down to our client as a blob. They're going to be passed down as a string, which is going to be a GUID. And SQLite doesn't have any support for GUIDs, and that's why we see them being stored as blobs. So now we have some data to work with. We've got our activity entity in place. What we need to do next is now start looking at how we can handle the CRUD methods we need so that when we send a request up to our API endpoints, we have the ability to create, read, update, etc. And now we're going to introduce the main pattern we're going to be using to do this. And before implementing this, I just want to talk about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it's going to work. So next what we're going to take a look at is commands and queries, which is what we're going to be creating as our handlers for our API endpoints. And we'll take a look at that next.